All right. First of all, thank you everyone for coming to class. In today's class, we're going to be discussing the additional listing documents. This is not just, we're not going to review the listing contract itself. That I'm going to save for a separate class. What I'm going to do in this class is talk about all the other documents that you'll need whenever you take a listing. So let's just switch over to this right away. Find my dot loop. There. Now we're ready to go. Okay. And I'm going to go over not only the forms that we need here at this market center, but all forms that you would need for any sort of listing at all. So the first form I'm showing you here is the dot loop note form. This is something that I ask everyone to complete. What it does, it's meant to have a couple different purposes. First of all, it helps me and whoever I have reviewing loops understand what exactly are we going to be looking for, because different listings are going to have different documents that we're going to need. Is this vacant land? Is this a well, let's start right from the beginning here. You would put in the address and then also put in the parcel number. What I'm finding fairly often is when a person sells a property, there might be 2-3 parcels included with it. So it's important for me to know that if it's one property address, that's fine. But if there are different parcels, I'm going to be looking for different tax bills, things like that. So it's important for me to know exactly what it is that we're looking for. Also, remember, all of this is a good reminder for you too, to make sure that you're getting everything that you need. Are you working with the buyer and the seller? In this case, you would start by indicating you're working with the seller. It's conceivable that as you go through the transaction, you find out you're going to be working with both. You can always come back to this form, change it to say buyer and seller. Again, this helps you to make sure that you know what documents you need, but it also helps me in reviewing the documents to make sure that all the right forms are there. How many buyers are you working with and how many sellers? This helps to make sure that you have the proper number of signatures that you're going to need on all the documents. Now remember, with a listing contract, you don't need all of the sellers to sign it. You only need one, because that one seller would be responsible for the commission then once that property closes. Personally, I prefer that if you have multiple sellers, you have everyone sign everything. It just makes things easier, cleaner, neater. There's no dispute moving forward. You have everyone's signature on everything, and now we know that everyone is agreeing to what this listing contract is. It's conceivable that if you have one person signing it, but you have a group of people that are the actual sellers, that there could be some conflict that takes place. By having them all sign all documents, we know the conflict isn't there because they've signed this document agreeing to these things. Is the seller, is this an estate or not? That's going to be important for me to know to make sure that the documents are signed properly. It's also important to you to make sure that the documents are signed properly. If it is an estate, I always recommend that you talk to the person who is selling the property to make sure they've talked with their attorney to make sure that they're signing all the documents the proper way. Every attorney has different ideas as to how these things should be signed. It's always best that they get advice from their attorney as to how to sign these documents, if a person is signing on behalf of an estate. Also, is this being sold by an organization or an LLC? That's important to know too, to make sure, again, especially if it's an LLC or an organization for that matter. I did some work with the Appleton Housing Authority. One of the things that I needed was to make sure I had the documentation that proved that the person who did sign the document is authorized to do so. The LLC documents will also have that in there that shows that this person is authorized to sign on behalf of the LLC, or if it's an organization, those documents will be able to show that indeed this person can sign on behalf of the organization. Is the person who owns the property selling it? Again, with a listing contract, they don't have to own it to sign the listing contract. They're just responsible for the commission. The people who own the property have to sign the offer. So you could have two different people involved. You could have a person signing the listing contract, they would sign that, but then the seller, the actual owners of the property, they would actually sign the offer to purchase. So that's just a good thing to know there too. Is who is signing if it's not the owner who's signing the documents, why? I'd just like an explanation as to what's going on. and then indicate the name of the company that's involved, and then what type of transaction are we looking at here. Now, you might not be able to answer these questions right at the beginning because you don't know for sure. Do the best you can. Is this going to be most likely an arm's length traditional transaction? If it were not an arm's length, if it were, you know, a sale to a relative or something, it wouldn't necessarily be an arm's length. But answer these questions the best you can. Is this going to be a bumpable offer? You wouldn't know that. Is this a one-party listing? That you would know. And it would indicate on the listing contract whether this is a one-party listing or not. Is this a physical buyer agency? That wouldn't pertain. But if this is a foreclosure, a short sale, a relocation, commercial, all of those things you would know the answer to. So please make sure you check this as to what type of transaction this listing is going to be. You can always change this or make additional comments once you get the buyer. You can make this say, this is a foreclosure, but it's also an arm's length transaction. So we know that on the seller side, it's a foreclosure situation and there are going to be banks involved. But as far as the buyer is concerned, it's still an arm's length transaction. Okay, the next form, this is the electronic consent. I always have everyone complete these things, and I always have each seller individually complete one. Now you can have, you know, if you have two sellers, you can have the two sellers complete the one form. That's okay. I personally prefer that each one complete their own, which means then that when you create the loop, you're going to have to put in 2 copies of the electronic consent, send one to one to seller 1 and another one to seller 2. It is important that you, the agent, complete lines 48, 49, 50, and 51. It's not important that you put in a specific address here, and it's okay if you leave this blank. The client might want this filled in, because then what happens is if you put in an address here, this is an e-consent only for this particular transaction. And the seller or buyer might prefer that. If you leave this blank, this e-consent is now good for an extended period of time with any number of transactions that you might be doing. So if you're working with an investor, or if you're working with a person who's going to sell and then turn around and buy, you might want to leave this blank, because now that one e-consent can apply to all of those transactions. Do make sure you complete, like I said, 48, 49, 50, and 51. This form must be emailed to the other client. The client can then open up this form and email it. It's the same thing as sharing it through dotloop. It's email. So you would share this and ask the client to fill in lines 52 and 53. They type in, they do not sign, they type in their name, they type in their email address and send it back to you. Now they've properly completed the electronic consent. That is only one of 2 ways that you can properly complete this. I've seen people have this signed in person. That is not a properly completed electronic consent. It has to be emailed. The other thing that you can do, and this is, we're running into this fairly often, is if the other party, your client or whoever you're sending this to, maybe has only one email address, but they have 2 different people. What you can do then is still email this to them. You'd instruct them to print this, fill in, write in their answers on 52 and 53, scan it, and then email it back to you. And that is the only second way of properly completing this form. So they either type it in themselves when you send it to their individual email addresses, or you send it to one, they print it, fill it in manually, scan it, and send it back in. That's an acceptable way too. I am kind of lenient with this form, but at some point here, I'm sure I'm going to stop being so lenient with this form. It is important that it be done electronically, because in essence, what you're doing is you're being able to demonstrate that the other person can receive email and can manipulate it and work within it. You have to demonstrate it. And by sending that form to them, having them complete it and send it back, you've now demonstrated that they can do it. The next form here is the Keller Williams affiliated business arrangement. This is a form that must be completed by everyone you work with, not necessarily everyone in the transaction, but everyone that you as an agent work with, regardless of whether they're a client or a customer. This is just a disclosure to that person, letting them know that the same people who own Keller Williams also own Transfer Title, and we're just letting you know. The reason we have to disclose that is anytime a single person runs the possibility of making a profit on a transaction on two different aspects of it, you have to disclose that this could happen. It's okay to do it. It's okay for the same person to own Keller Williams and to own the title company. You just have to let people know that that's happening. This is not a contract to let the people, or this is not a contract to use Transfer Title. This is merely a disclosure. The way this document is written is actually dictated to us by the federal government as to how this form is completed and the verbiage that is used, even to the point of this section being highlighted as it is. This is all a regulation as to how this is going to be done through the federal government, and we can't change it. Now, rarely do we run into a situation where a person refuses to sign it, but it does happen every now and then. That's okay if they refuse to sign it. Because what we're doing is we're disclosing, and in essence, by talking about this form, we're disclosing that this is going on, even though they might not have signed it. Make some sort of documentation in dotloop when you submit this to me that says, I gave this to the customer or client, they understood it, but they refused to sign it. And then at least that way I know, all right, you gave it to them, you talked about it, they were uncomfortable signing it, I'm not going to force them to sign it, but now I believe we've met the requirement to have that disclosure take place. So, but more often than not, people will sign this. It's not an issue. As long as you make it clear, this is not a contract and you're not obligated to use Transfer Title. But this is important. I will return a loop if this form is not completed. Actually, our attorneys check with the broker and I once a year, and I write a legal statement that says everybody signs this. I return the loop if it's not done. I insist this is done, and the vast majority of the people do indeed actually sign it. So it's something that legally once a year I have to disclose to our corporate attorneys to say we're doing this. All right, the real estate condition report. This is, I think, the new one. Nope, this is not. This is the old real estate condition report. I'm sorry about that. I should have uploaded the new one. Has everyone seen the new real estate condition report? Okay, good. It's isn't it great that it's 6 pages now instead of 3 or 2 like the other one? It is kind of nice. And actually, you know what? I'm going to go back and I'm going to find the new addendum S. Or real estate condition report. Whoops, I got to hit all documents there. Sorry about this. Edit right there. 2018. Okay, I'll move it down to, you guys got to help me out here because I'm having a hard time seeing this. I want to put it next to the other one. Up. Right there? Okay. So I want to make sure I open this one. So estimated cost. The addendum S. Oh, wait a minute here. S, TR, seller disclosure, delivery, updates. Okay. All right. Let me go and open these, and then we'll be able to talk about this. And I don't want to autofill anything. All right, this is the new real estate condition report. This, just from this point forward, everyone has to use this. We had a little bit of a transition period that I think we're pretty much over. Although I'm sure I'm still going to see some of the old ones. The important thing is this real estate condition report has to be filled out, first of all, from this point forward with all new listings. But anytime that we get a real estate condition report where the buyer sees it, not necessarily when the offer is submitted, but when the buyer sees it and most likely signs it, that it be on or after July 1st, it has to be on this form. If it's any time in June or prior, where the buyer dates it, and maybe let's say the offer, the buyer saw it June 30th, and then the offer is submitted to me July 10th. They can still use the new form because it has to do with when did the buyer see it, not when is the offer submitted and accepted. So anytime, the first time a buyer gets and actually signs a real estate condition report, if it's July 1st or after, which, we're almost in August, so we've almost got that behind us, we're always going to be using the new real estate condition report. And there's also a new vacant land disclosure, and I think there's a new farm disclosure too. Now, as with any real estate condition report, remember that you can't fill this out, and you can't help the seller with this. It's okay if you put in the address, and I can live with you putting in the date. But from that point forward, you cannot help the seller fill this out at all. You literally turn it over to them and say, this is you disclosing to the buyer what you think the condition of the property is. You don't have to go out and get a home inspection. You don't have to do any of that. You just sit at this table and you mark whether you think that there's an issue with this particular aspect of the property or not. First page just goes into a lot of disclosures and information about the condition report. And then here on page 1, you can start with, are you aware of defects in the roof? The seller marks yes, no, or not applicable. The way this form is changed is that they have it in sections. So here they're talking about structural and mechanical. They ask you all sorts of questions about structural and mechanical issues. If you do have an issue, we have the seller answer or explain why they said yes in this section. So it's not one great big section at the end of the real estate condition report anymore. They've broken it up a little bit. And actually, if you go through this report and you look at it point by point, you will find that there are far more disclosures on this form than there were in the past. Environmental. Are there any environmental issues with the property? Yes, no, or not applicable. You go ahead and explain any yeses. Well, septic system, storage tanks, etc. So they have it all broken down into different categories. This is a lot of this is new. Taxes, special assessments, permits. They ask you, are you aware of, well, what's the first one? Let me read that here. Have you received notice of property tax increases or other normal annual increases, or are you aware of pending property reassessment? Every community every now and then does a reassessment. So the seller might be aware of it, although they might not have actually received the new assessment. But here now you're able to disclose, yep, the community's doing a reassessment, don't know what it is yet. But at least now you're letting the potential buyer know that this is happening. Land use, this is actually an expanded section too. Talk a little bit more on that. And then additional information, kind of a catch-all. This is where if just something else that you think that the buyer should know about the property that the seller feels they should disclose, you'll be able to do that here. And again, always you have these open categories. Please make sure that you have the seller's complete number of years that they've owned the property and or lived in the property. So please make sure you have them do that. Remember, this has to be done by the owner, by themselves, without any help from you. If they need help, they should really have their attorney help them with it. It's terribly important that we don't do it. And then this is where they sign. This is where the owner would sign. If a person other than the owner completed this, such as a personal rep, maybe appointed by the court to go ahead and sell the property, they would sign here. So this is just a certification of person supplying the information. And then buyer's acknowledgement, just acknowledging that they've received the report. Okay, the next one is the addendum S. This is where the seller discloses to the buyer whether they think they've had any lead-based paint or not. It's okay for you to put in the address here, but I do ask that the seller answer these questions. Are they aware of any lead-based paint, and do they have any reports? I would like them to answer that question. If they don't answer the question and you submit this loop, I will send it back and ask you to have the sellers answer these questions. Even if they say none, not available, I'm not aware of any, at least now they've answered the question. And now we can give that to the buyer and let the buyer know what the seller thinks the situation is on this property. So please make sure that you have them answer these questions here. If indeed they know they have lead-based paint, they should indicate, yes, we have lead-based paint. And yes, I do have a report and it's attached to this addendum S. You're not going to run into this very often, but every now and then you will. Someone might have a report. Earlier I referenced the Appleton Housing Authority. They do test for lead in all of their properties that they buy. So if they then turn around and sell a property, they know they have a report, so they have to say, yes, we have lead-based paint. Yes, I have a report, and attached is the report. So they would disclose, they would actually say yes to all of these. The vast majority of the people don't. They don't know if they have lead-based paint. They assume they do simply by the nature of the age of the home, but they don't know for sure and they don't have any reports. It's fine if they disclose that. Some interesting things about lead: the older the house, the more likely it is to have lead-based paint. They picked 1978 as the cutoff date because I think they stopped putting lead in paint in 1975. And they wanted to have a 2 or 3 year window as to which to get all of that paint out of the system. They didn't insist that manufacturers get rid of their lead-based paint, but they said you can't make it anymore, but you can still go ahead and sell your inventory. So they figured they'd sell that inventory between 75 and 78, so that at that point forward, there would be no lead in paint moving forward. Probably the biggest point or the biggest place where you're going to find lead is not necessarily in paint, but in stain. So if you've got an old house with original hardwood floors that are stained and you're looking to refinish those, there's a good chance that that stain has got a ton of lead in it. So also interesting about lead is as the more lead you put into paint, the brighter the house, or brighter the color. So if you at the day we're loaded, it's like, well, throw some extra lead in there so my house is nice and vibrant, so everyone knows how much money I make and stuff like that. It was a status thing to throw a lot of lead into the paint, and the more lead you put in, the brighter the color, which was a bigger status symbol. My head is just full of interesting little pointless facts like that. Make sure you have them sign it. They sign, put in, print their name and date it. Do remember to sign this contract yourself. This is one of the few that you actually have to sign. So as the listing agent, you would sign here, put in your name and company here, and put in the date. The selling agent, I should say, would then sign down here. Same thing, name, company, date. Do make sure that they answer whether they want an inspection or not. Even if they want to waive the inspection, which the vast majority of people do, please make sure that if you're a listing agent and there's an addendum S involved and you receive an offer, that they, first of all, include the addendum S, but secondly, that they indicate whether they want an inspection or not. Then the buyers would sign, print their name and date here. This is a document that's generated, again, by the federal government. They insist that all properties have this that are built prior to 1978. Please make sure you include that with all of your homes that are built 1977 or earlier. This is the addendum TR. And the only reason I'm suggesting that I put this into the listing contract documents is you can pre-fill out a lot of this information. This, of course, you would leave this blank because we don't know when the offer is written and who the offer is written by. You will have an address, so you can go ahead and fill that in if you want. But you don't know which one of these categories the buyer is going to want to use. Every buyer is going to have a different circumstance, and they might use one of these sections. So leave that blank. Go ahead and fill in this section on the right. Name, address, your license number. I can't see what that is. Oh, contact name. So you put your name here. Thank you. Agent license number here, email address, and your phone number. Fill out that section completely. And then I would definitely upload this to the MLS, just like you would your real estate condition report and addendum S, because now when a person writes an offer on this property, you're going to have the addendum TR available if they wish to use it. They don't have to, but at least now you'll have all of your information there. They can now just take this addendum TR, fill in their information on this side, and then away we go. You know, you'll be able to use it. It's nice to have this whole section completed when submitting the offer. The lender and the underwriter especially need this information. You do not have to use the addendum TR. It's not necessary. I suggest you do use it if if the buyer is getting financing. If it's a cash offer, you don't need the addendum TR at all. This is where you would have the initials for all the parties involved. Next form is the seller disclosure. I do ask that all sellers complete this. And it's very simple disclosures. It talks about, first of all, legal advice. I'm not an attorney. I can't give you legal advice. If you need to understand the legal ramifications of this contract, please see an attorney. Let your seller know that I'm a real estate agent. I'm not an attorney. This is a contract. So if you have questions, make sure you see an attorney. Encourage them to see one if they wish. Testing and inspections. You're not a certified tester for anything. Well, at least I don't think any of you are. Or licensed home inspectors. So don't act as though you are, and make sure the seller understands, I'm not a licensed home inspector. If you want an opinion on the condition of this house, you need to bring in a professional to have you tell you what they think it is. I can't do that. This next section is, I'm thinking seriously about deleting this. The fact that if you do sell a home protection plan, it's conceivable that you might get a stipend. This used to be very, very popular, but since 2009, 2010, that has fallen on the wayside because some people might view it as a RESPA violation. So, but there are one or two companies that do this. So that's why I leave it in here. The next one is just an authorization to allow information to be passed on to the title company from your mortgage company or any other organization. This is just a blanket disclosure that says, yes, I give permission for these different companies to talk about what my mortgage payoff is, things like that. Usually your mortgage company won't accept this. They have their own authorization form that they ask that the seller fill out. Because remember, at the closing, the title company is going to pay off the mortgage. They're going to make sure all the things are paid off. The taxes are paid off, the mortgage is paid off, everything is paid off. But the title company needs permission from the seller to talk to the mortgage company. That's what this section does, is give that permission. Some mortgage companies don't recognize it, and they're just going to have a new form for you to complete. I just leave that in there because sometimes that does help. The KW inclusion and delivery form. I ask that this be completed on all listings, regardless of what type of listing it is. Now, vacant land, you're not going to have anything included. There won't be inclusions, exclusions, things like that. So this bottom section probably would not be used for vacant land. or would probably not be used for commercial or things like that. But this top section is definitely going to be used by anyone who's going to write an offer on your property, regardless of what type of property it is. So you put the property address and your name here. Then down here, the seller's optional recipient of delivery. Does the seller have, you know, on the offer to purchase, where the first section where they talk about delivery, it talks about optional personnel for delivery. And I always recommend putting in the agent's name so that you are that other person who can receive it. Because remember, the buyer and the seller can always receive documents. That's automatic. But we need to talk about other ways of doing it. And receive it by, I mean, literally, here, I'm handing it to you, you're now receiving it. But if there are other ways of doing it and other people involved, we have to discuss that in the contract. What you're doing here is saying, and I would recommend, put your agent's name here so that when they fill out the offer, they can see that, oh, okay, the optional person is going to be, in my case, Peter Stick. I'm going to put that in as the optional person for delivery. Is this fax delivery here? Oh, mail. So if you want to go ahead and authorize mailing for a delivery, you'd be able to put that here also. This is fax delivery. You can put the fax number here. Here, let me walk over here. Fax, mailing, and email. Okay. And then you would put the email address as to where you want all the documents delivered. What I would do here, if I were you, put the agent's name here, skip the mail, maybe use fax if you know the other person can't do electronic delivery, and then put in your email address here. So that when the buyer and the buyer's agent writes an offer, they can look at this form and they go, okay, Pete Stick for the delivery, they don't want to do mail, they don't want to do fax, and here's Pete's email address for delivery. And as the buyer's agent, I will just fill in my information as to what my buyer would like as far as delivery is concerned. Always make sure you indicate whether the seller has agreed to electronic consent or not. They don't have to, and if they don't, you just say no, and what that's going to do is tell the other agent, well, I guess I can't use email, I'm going to have to use fax or personal delivery of things back and forth. Now, there are ways around that, and I'll talk about that at a different class, or if you have a concern about that, see me after class and I'll be able to talk to you about that. But do make sure you indicate whether they agree to it or not. So check yes or no, one way or another. More often than not, if they're able to do things electronically and you have that electronic consent signed, check yes. And then that way, when the buyer looks at this, they can see, oh, okay, you're okay with electronic delivery, so are we, so I will include that in the email delivery section of the offer. If you say no, then that buyer should think, okay, I guess I can't email anything. I might have to do a different amendment, and I'll talk about that at a different time, or I just might stick with fax machines and faxing things back and forth. So please make sure you complete this form and you upload it into the MLS. The seller update, this is just a disclosure by the seller to let the buyer know what updates have taken place on the property. What I recommend is major updates that took place in the last 10 years, minor updates that took place in the last 5. So like when I sell my house, new bathroom in 2016, new kitchen in 2018, and you know, a new roof in 2003, which is 15 years, so maybe I wouldn't include that or something like that. But a painted whole house would maybe be like a minor update, and I did that 2 years ago. Any sort of updates that the seller feels like they would like to disclose to the buyer would be a good thing to put on this list. Now, I highly recommend that this list be completed as thoroughly as possible. And then this uploaded into the MLS and this available for the buyer. But more importantly, by having your seller do this and complete it as thoroughly as possible, this is now available to an appraiser, where now they can go under the MLS, they can look at the updates, and they can see a whole list of updates that have taken place. And now you've just made it easier for them to appraise this house accurately. So there's like a couple different uses for this form. One of the things that, over the last few years, there's been appraisal issues with the market being the way it has. Appraisals are all over the place. So I've been in a couple of forums where appraisers have spoken about how difficult it is to do an appraisal and what can we as an agent do to be able to help this. And they actually said, this is one of the two biggest things that you can do is complete this report as thoroughly as possible and with as many details as possible. A brand new kitchen probably isn't enough. Brand new countertops, quartz countertops, new cabinets, luxury vinyl floor, heated floor in your bathroom, ceramic tile. Giving details about that really helps, first of all, sell the property, but secondly, it also helps the appraiser in trying to determine the value of the property. The other big thing that the appraiser mentioned that would help, tons of pictures. Let's really look at these pictures and have a good idea as to what's in the property. Those two things will help your home appraisal more accurately and probably at a higher price. So please make sure you have your seller do this and complete it to the best of their ability. If you need 2 or 3 pages to do this, that's fine. If you want to have a completely separate sheet where the seller just writes it out, like on a Word document, just writes everything out, that's fine too. But do have them discuss as much as they can about that. Seller estimated sheet. This is not a mandatory form, but I suggest that everyone do complete this for a couple of different reasons. First of all, you want to have this, the seller's going to want an idea as to, how much is everything going to be and what's my bottom line? How much am I going to clear here? These dollar figures that I have put in already are estimates, and they might be a little high, but they're just estimates. The rest of these forms, you can put in, again, estimates depending on what the value of the property is. The nice thing about this form is I do have it set up in such a way where as you put in information, it does calculations for you. So we'll do $100,000. Right away, it calculates what the state transfer fee is going to be. Title company fee, you just put in an estimate, but you would probably be able to get that number from that transfer title form that we signed in the beginning, so you'll be able to look at that. Property taxes, let's say the taxes are going to be $200 a month, approximately, and it's going to take maybe 8 months to sell. There it populates the total as to what it is. Your commission, you could put in 6% plus the $495. Put that in. It does the calculation for you as to what your commission is going to be, and then it gives you a bottom line as to how much that person's going to clear. If you know this additional information, go ahead and put it in, and it'll do the calculations for you and put that number right here. I suggest you do this because, first of all, it gives the seller an idea as to how much the costs are going to be, but probably more importantly, it tells you whether there's enough money in this deal in order for it to close. And if things get tight, the last person to get paid in a transaction are the real estate agents. So if you run out of money and let's say the commission is supposed to be $6,000 and there's only $5,000 left, that's all you're going to get. Or let's say you run out of money and at the end there's only $100 left, that's all you're going to get. And then I have to now pay that co-broke the full 2% of that, so that comes out of our pocket, which means you guys don't get paid and we lose money. We're business people. We're not in the business of doing that sort of thing. So I think it's a responsibility of the agent to be able to understand, if we go through with this transaction, the way we laid it out, is there enough money for everyone involved? It's just a good business decision to make sure that everything is there. And I believe that's the last form. So, like I said, I didn't go over the listing contract, but these are the basic forms that would be needed for a listing. I realize that every transaction is going to be a little different, so there might be some additional addendums that you roll in. Let's say you're listing a short sale. There'd be the addendum SSL that would be available for you. If this is a relocation, the relocation company is going to have a ton of additional documents for you to include in the listing packet. Foreclosure, it's conceivable that all the foreclosure, and you're selling a property for the bank, they might sign the listing contract and none of these other documents. Banks can do as they wish. They just have to understand that they might have to suffer the consequences for it, where it might make it difficult for this person to sell, or for a person to buy the property, but that's up to the bank to decide. But every circumstance is going to be a little bit different. Do you guys have any questions about the forms I went over? No? Feel pretty good about them? All right, all right. Everyone, thank you again for coming to class. I appreciate it. As always, if you have any questions, please don't be afraid to give me a call. All right. Thanks, everyone. Yes, if you would, please. Stop recording. Next one up.